Wow. It's a scary story time for us today on The Ravi Show. So I want to tell you a story that I like to call The Ghost of Fantan Alley. I live in Victoria, BC, and at one point in our history, there was a gold rush, and many people came to Victoria on the way to the area where there was a gold rush. And many of those people came from China. Well, Victoria had a thriving Chinatown back in the 1800s, as it does today. And there was one particular area called Fantan Alley, as there still is today. Now, Fantan Alley is a really extremely narrow street. It's considered the narrowest street in North America. It looks like an alley, but it's designated a street. Now, way back then in the 1800s, and then some, that little alley was primarily for gambling, opium dens, and prostitution. A long time ago, this story begins in May of 1889. There was a 17-year-old boy named Chung who worked in a hotel in Chinatown, or near Chinatown. On one of his trips to Chinatown, Chung met this beautiful young woman named Yao. Now, Yao had been brought over from China by a man that we could call a pimp for today's standards. He owned her. He actually owned this woman. Actually, I think he brought her over from San Francisco, actually. Anyway, so he brought her up, and she was an absolutely beautiful woman. And what Yao was going to be used for was a sort of advertisement for his brothel that this man, what was his name? That her owner, Yip Tang, he had a brothel, and he wanted Yao to be the woman who sat in the window and encourage men to come in and visit the other ladies. So she was very beautiful. She knew how to entice. She would sing to them. She would give all the men a lot of charm and a lot of flirtation, and I suppose made some promises she couldn't keep, because she was, after all, Yip's property. So one day she was doing as she normally would do and trying to enchant men and bring them in, and this young boy named Chung, who was only 17, he saw her and he was struck by her beauty, and she enticed him and flirted with him, and he had never had the experience before of a woman acting towards him this way, so in his mind it was love. He wasn't very sophisticated. I mean, what 17-year-old boy is that sophisticated? So instead of sort of just smiling and going along with her and going in the room like the other men would do, what Chung did was he came right up to her and he declared his love for her, and he told her that they could go away and live in Vancouver and start a new life, and that he would make her so happy. And she didn't know what to say to that. I guess she just laughed it off and said, I can't. Yip, her owner, would be so angry and she couldn't leave. And she just thought, well, I'll just brush him off, and he's a young boy, and what is he going to do? So Chung was disheartened and he went home. But he came back the very next day, and he came up to her window and he slipped this very small vial of poison into her hand and said, just give your owner this poison, and when he dies we can go live in Vancouver and have this beautiful life, and I'll marry you. And she was so shocked at this, which most people would be. It's poison. This young man is declaring his love and threatening to kill someone. She just sort of loudly told him to go away, told him that, you know, he's just this poor boy who doesn't have a lot of money, and she's being dressed in fine clothing and fed wonderful food, and even if she could get away from Yip, she wouldn't want to marry him. So she more or less laughed at him while all these other people were gathered around, and they saw him sort of slink away, very embarrassed, and I mean, he was humiliated in front of everybody in Chinatown. So what happened was Chung went back home, and he found one of his friends who worked in the fish industry. And he told him, I would like you and a friend, to distract her, and I will grab her and pull her away to a private spot. And when we're in this private spot, I can tell her how much I love her and how I feel, and surely she'll listen to me then. And so I guess his friends thought, well, maybe it'll work. So they went down to where Yao was, and they distracted her. And Chung grabbed her and pulled her from the window. But to everyone's surprise, he took this big fish knife out of the folds of his clothing, and he cut Yao's head clean off. And as the blood just spurted, and people just turned around to see what had happened, and they all backed away in horror, and he dropped this head to the ground of this beautiful woman that supposedly he loved. He started to run, and he ran for his life through Fantan Alley with a crowd slowly chasing him. Now he ran back to the hotel where he worked, and since other people there were used to seeing him there, they didn't think about anything. And he ran into the hotel and he hid. Well, soon after, pictures of him were put up around town for someone, if they seen him, to contact the authorities, the police. And someone he worked with at the hotel told the authorities that he is in the hotel. He was seen running into this hotel. So they searched that hotel from top to bottom, and they could not find him. Finally, they went into this back boiler room totally dark. And Chung opened his eyes wide because he was surprised. And if it wasn't for the fact that they could see the whites of his eyes, he may have gotten away with this, but they got him. And they took him to prison to await trial. And apparently he beat them to his likely execution. Chung, he strangled himself using his shirt and metal bar in his cell. He killed himself before he could be executed by the authorities. And apparently, from that point on, his ghost has been felt, seen, and heard in Fantan Alley. Now, when he did kill himself, the authorities, they just buried him in an unmarked grave, and that was that. They did no special ceremony. And in the Chinese tradition, you have to send people off in a certain way for it to be considered I suppose, a good death, if there is such a thing. Because the fact that they didn't do this, his old hotel where he used to work, Fantan Alley, businesses around there, all these places started having problems. One thing after another after another. The Chinese workers stopped going to the hotel to work, and they beseeched the owner if they could do the right rituals to appease his spirit. So, because the owner couldn't get them to work, he agreed. They did the right rituals for any Chinese male that had passed over. And apparently from then on, the problems eased up. And to this very day, one of the restaurants near Fantan Alley, they will still leave out a bit of food for him every single day. And people have often felt themselves being pushed by an unseen hand. They've sometimes seen this young Chinese man running through Fantan Alley with blood-stained clothing. Or they'd hear something. And this has been going on back and forth for years since this murder. So there you have it. I've been down through Fantan Alley often. I knew about Chung. I haven't felt his presence. I have at times felt an eerie sensation going through there, but nothing too frightening. But you know, you never know. I do have an interest in ghost hunting and the paranormal, so may happen. Okay, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. Maybe we'll do this more often. There's a lot of ghost stories in Victoria, BC. I don't know what it is about this town. Some people say it's the weather, the moisture in the air, the rain makes it easier to see the paranormal, hear the paranormal. Who knows? But It's interesting stuff, to say the least. Okay, so I hope you can get to sleep tonight and don't think about a young Chinese man running through an alleyway covered in blood with a dropped head on the ground behind him. Ugh, it's just gross. Anyway, guys, next video will be on Tuesday. Alrighty, have a good rest of your weekend, and we'll see you soon.